seen that Jim in several photographs have to do with that sort of enigmatic smile on his face. And I'm sure he's got that on his face now, looking down and feeling very, very proud of all of the speakers who have presented today. So at this point, I'll thank all of those speakers and hand over to Craig Yes. No, Benjo? You got the microphone?
No,
oh, it's
so it is here.
It's this one. It's got a clip like that.
Okay.
It clips onto your.
So I get myself hooked up to this.
Yeah.
And this.
Have we found a technician?
We've
got it.
I think we got it.
You've got it. I think either of these. I think maybe that's.
I got my own advance. So this is on?
Yeah.
All right. It is a late hour. Can everyone hear me? Good. Well, I am particularly pleased and honored to be invited to take part in this symposium. I'm not a member of the family, but I've known Jim for a very, very long time and been very much influenced by his work, as I will quickly summarize here. I really want to tell mainly 3 anecdotes about my experiences with Jim. And I'll begin by my beginning, that I was a first-year graduate student in 1970. And this was a watershed time in our discipline in which radiochemical methods were changing over to stable isotope NMR. And Jim was I think a major player in that transition in the biosynthetic world. And I was a graduate student working on one of these problems, vitamin B12 in Ian Scott's lab. Major competitor, of course, was Alan Battersby, as many of you well know. I was the first person in Ian's group actually to work on vitamin B12. It was a watershed time in science. These were the big labs were working on these problems. I think it was very influential. But the methods that were being used, were changing quickly. And I would put this, became interested in aflatoxin, which is a fungal natural product, carcinogen. And Bucke, George Bucke, then at MIT, carried out what I would call the high water mark of classical biosynthetic studies of radiochemical incorporation and then systematic stepwise degradation to isolate the site of radioactivity and, of course, the identity of what label went there. And the interesting observation in aflatoxin of 2 carboxyl labels ending up adjacent to each other, which of course they should not, and 2 methyl labels hitting next to each other, which of course they should not. And this was an idea that was planted in my head very early on in graduate school as this contradiction. And it's something that when I had my own independent career, was something that I wanted to take a look at. So during this time, Jim was undergoing a transition too, I think. He had been in Battersby's group, connecting with Battersby's group for quite a long while, working in alkaloids, and was beginning to branch off as an independent scientist, more independent scientist, and attacked the field of polyketides, which is relatively little unknown at the time in biosynthesis. And I came to know him, not by meeting him, but through the literature and reading the literature. and particularly this person, Mary Garson, who would be years, 30 years before I would actually meet her, unbelievably productive student who produced, by my count, which I might be wrong here, 16 papers. I don't know how many papers each of you did as a graduate student, but I think I did about 7. I was absolutely awed by that. And of course, by Finian Lieber, did a large number of papers well. And I've always admired Finian's name. Isn't it wonderful to have a name that people hear once and they never forget for the rest of your life? So these are the papers that were really influential among them. But here, a method for the detection of starter units, a classic problem in fungal polyketide biosynthesis. Another theme that has been in my mind and influenced me for a very long time. And then the development of NMR methods. This is a really excellent review at the time, encompassing what was known, this emerging field of using stable isotopes to report on carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, and protons, and oxygen as a remote label. And then John Vetteris, a very good friend of ours, and Jim's, unfortunately stuck with work back home and unable to participate today, wrote, I think, a landmark review on the use of what I would call paired isotope techniques for exploring biosynthesis. So for us, for me, this led to this algorithm, this bioinformatics tool we call the UMA algorithm, defined linker regions in domains of proteins that have many catalytic domains. Define the linkers for the purpose of being able to take the proteins apart and analyze directly what the function of the individual domains are. And of course, the other side of that is once you know where the linkers are, you can think about combinatorial mixing and matching and ideally capturing the synthetic capability of these individual domains or classes of domains. And this led to identification of that domain in fungal polyketides, the non-reducing polyketide synthases in fungi that give rise to the starter unit effect. And this was back to aflatoxin, the PKSA, which is the polyketide synthase that assembles nosellarinic acids, the precursor, actually, of aflatoxin. And the use of the UMA algorithm allows the identification of individual domains in a family of related enzymes, in this case, non-reducing polyketide synthases, they're at the heart of fungal polyketides. And there are 2 domains of unknown function using what was available for bioinformatics in those days. And the starter unit acyltransferase is the magic domain that hooks the pieces together. Okay. But everything changed with this paper. This was a revolutionary paper, the identification of modular polyketide synthases, paper from Peter Ledley's lab. And Jim and Peter had been collaborating in the 1980s before this paper was published on looking at macrolide biosynthesis. And erythromycin was the vitamin B12 of that quest. And as I say, this changed everything. Everyone became interested now in modular enzymes. So polyketide synthases, and then the related family of non-ribosomal peptide synthetases. And this article, immodestly called the Millennium Review of Polyketide Synthases, I have given this article to every single graduate student who's entered my lab since 2001 when this was published. And it remains, to me, the most useful, comprehensive, insightful single article for students to read. All right, I'm going to change gears now and tell you my 3 stories about Jim. And this is a photograph I think that I took. I can't remember. This is back before we had cameras in our phones. So this must have been done with a real camera. And I have some from the dinner that took place at St. Catherine's. So this was the retirement in quotes, party of Alan Battersby. And I realized this is the room where the symposium took place. And in fact, I find myself sitting exactly where I did 30 years ago in this room. And it was organized by Jim. And I actually found the file. I had to hunt to find it, but I found the file of little handouts for the program, the dinner, who the speakers were, everything in a file. And this is actually a page. And this amazes me as I think back on this, how different the world was 30 years ago. The symposium, with outside speakers invited, and having been, in the enemy camp during the B-12 wars, I was really humbled and honored to participate in the symposium. 3 days with outside speakers, and then a 4th day of symposium for people who are in the group, a day like today for people who have been in Battersby's lab. So that was a really nice thing. But the majestic pace of it, look at the times. Everybody had an hour to give a talk. When was the last time you've been at a meeting in science where any speaker had an hour to talk? Everybody got an hour. It seems majestic by comparison. So Jim set this up, and here is Jack Baldwin is the very first speaker. Whoops, not quite there. There's Jack. This is before he became Sir Jack, about 5 years before he became Sir Jack. But he was still King Jack. I can remember this quite clearly. And he had his hour, right? And he was right here. And Jack talked for more than an hour, well more than an hour, well into the coffee break. And I was nervous about this, right? He was a formidable guy by any standard. And we were competing on some problems on beta-lactam biosynthesis, and to be put after Jack, I thought, this is really a subversive thing for Jim to do. And I came to realize the longer he liked doing that, pushing your buttons just a little bit, just to see how you would respond. So I survived that, and miraculously enough, my very deep friend, Peter Ledley, we've known each other since we were postdocs together, at the ETH, talked right after on, of course, erythromycin. Okay, so now I'm going to tell another story. And this was a meeting like this, and there was a symposium dinner, and then people decamped to the bar after the symposium dinner. And it was a particularly rowdy time. And for some reason or other, Tom, I conflate this with polyketides 3 and 9/11. And which was, for an American, I'm in Bristol. It was a terrible day, horrible, horrible day. The 23rd anniversary was just 10 days ago. And at this particular meeting, the bar closed at 2, and people were very excited and talking, and they decamped to somebody's rooms to continue the party. And I didn't know where it was or who was in charge, but I walked out of the bar, and there was so much noise coming from this now after party that I just followed the noise down here, there, up a staircase. Door was wide open. Rooms were packed with people, absolutely packed with people. And it was very hot. And, ties were off, jackets were off, sleeves were rolled up. And in the middle of the room was a table and 2 chairs, and guys who were arm wrestling. And I'd heard that in England, arm wrestling was something of a national sport, and here it was happening, and it was so loud. It was a micro coliseum, And in the arena were two guys, all guys, ladies, sorry, it's all guys, and they were arm wrestling. Enormous amounts of noise, sides were chosen, lots of yelling and screaming, and Jim's there, but not participating. Commenting from the outside, just gently, and I walked up to him, and he walked up to me, and he said, "Craig, you know, you're just about the only American who's here. I really think you should experience this part of English culture." And it was really ill-advised. But I'd been going to a gym for a couple of years, and in my state at the time, I should also mention that bottles of single malt were being passed around the room while this is all going on. Lots and lots of noise. So, of course, I sat down, and I held off two younger guys, and I was feeling pretty good. I was about to quit while I was ahead, stand up and just walk away, when a woman sat down in the chair opposite me. She was in a sleeveless dress, and she had this glint in her eye, and I knew this was not going to end well. And so I sat down, I put my arm up, and she clasped my hand. And she clasped my hand, and I thought, wow, those are really well-developed arms. So I pushed as hard as I could, and she absolutely did not move. And the next thing I knew, I was tilting over and reaching for the edge of the table to keep from falling on the floor, and bam, my knuckles were on the table. And Jim, standing with her, comes right over and whispers in my ear, "Craig, you're a gentleman." As if I'd thrown it to this woman, which I didn't. She whooped me fair and square. So I can't remember what her name was. If she would announce herself at the dinner, I would feel better. But I remember, I'm not offering a rematch, but I did manage to get a picture before she jumped away. I think this is her, but I'm not sure. So I think Jim also said, "Craig, there's something you should know." Who this person is. She rode for Cambridge.